All right, everyone. This is episode 5 of Fish On, the show where we talk everything fishing. Today, our focus is going to be mostly fly fishing and salmon fishing. And I've got two guests that I'm really excited to have on. One is Chris Sinclair. He grew up fishing the St. Mary's River here in Nova Scotia. Now he's a guide out in Labrador. At Crooks Lake Lodge, and there's another one, I think Flowers Lodge. I'll ask him when he comes on the show. He's also had the opportunity to be on The New Fly Fisher, if you ever watched that show, so that's pretty cool. We'll talk to him about that as well. My second guest is Jakob. He's a 16-year-old phenom when it comes to fly fishing and fly tying. He's got an absolute obsession with salmon fishing. He's on the Youth Team Canada team. Then they do fishing competitions all over the world. So I'm really excited to talk to the both of them about that and fly tying. They're both two amazing fly tyers. I wish I could tie half as good as they can. So yeah, I'm not even going to wait. I'm just going to bring them right on right now. So let's get them going. Here comes Chris Sinclair. Hey, Chris, how you doing, buddy?
Good, how you doing?
Not too bad.
On the Marguerite right now.
And Jakob, there you are.
Hello.
Hey, Jakob, thanks for coming on,
Hey,
fellas.
how's it going?
Chris, you're on the move there. Where are you at?
I'm on the Marguerite right now. Came to Cape Breton last night and fished around a bit, and now I'm on the Marguerite. So I'll be here for a couple days. So if anyone's around, give me a shout. Try to share a stretch.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and giving up, the last light hours on the Marguerite there. You know, I hear they're some of the best, so I appreciate that. So yeah, let's get right into it. Usually what I do is get my guests to give a short intro about themselves. Just kind of, what it is you do, how you got into fishing, how you guys got into, both you guys I mentioned are great fly tyers, how you got into that. So why don't we start with you, Chris? You want to go ahead?
I started fly fishing, I think 11 years ago now. And I've been at it, constantly for quite a while, off and on by times. And now I'm just kind of made it a lifestyle. Been guiding for the past 5 years, and fly tying comes with that. Preparing flies for my clients. It all kind of started at the same time, actually, my fly fishing and fly tying. But previous to that, I did spin fish quite regularly with my father, and I think my fly fishing obsession started, or why I wanted to fly fish, was because I grew up on the banks of the St. Mary's, and I wanted to fish the St. Mary's, and I could not with a spinning rod in my area. So I said, well, I'm going to pick up fly fishing. And the winter before I started fly fishing, I got a fly tying kit and went crazy with that, making all kind of, horrendous flies and everything. And then I started taking fly tying classes. And of course, if anyone knows me, I started deviating off that, and just really not like listening to my instructor, which is terrible. I wouldn't recommend it. So I kind of went off on a tangent on my own, area, and then I kind of slid back into it. I'm still known for my one-off flies and things like that, but I don't know, practice makes perfect with that. It's been quite a while. Like I said, it's been about 10 years. And, I'm sure as any fly tyer can agree with this, you kind of hit this, you kind of go through like peaks and troughs. And recently I think I'm on a peak, but I mean, I think it's a lot of it's mental. It's like how to, like, you sit down the vise, you're just tying terrible flies. And then like one day you sit down, you're in the saddle and you're rocking it. And I really think that fishing is the same way. I don't know about you guys, but I feel that way. What do you guys think? You guys really think the same thing? Like the peaks and troughs? aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I agree with you for sure. You know, I think fishing, like a lot of other things, is really a learning experience. You know, it's like going out there and trying to adapt to different situations and figuring out new things, and talking to different anglers. And I think one of the most important things, and I mentioned this with a previous guest, and we both had the same kind of idea as to what one of the most important things in angling is not to be like is to be open-minded to other ideas. So in fly fishing, being open-minded to trying other flies, and in spin fishing, like trying different types of techniques and gear. So I definitely agree with you there, Chris. We'll let Jakob speak to that. What do you think, Jakob?
Oh, 100%. I think you can definitely get into some good days, like where everything feels good. And obviously, you're being successful in what you're doing. I know there's a lot of days when you're trout fishing or even salmon fishing, and it's just everything's going wrong with no confidence. Confidence is so important. I think salmon fishing, if you're on the river and you're not really expecting to do much, at least for me, it's never worked out. You go to the river with confidence, and everything tends to be on. You're casting, you're getting it where you want to. You got a good fly on. I think, yeah, just like Chris said, all kind of comes together.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to be said about the confidence, because when I'm salmon fishing, there's one fly I'm confident in, and it seems like, and I don't know if it's just like, I mean, it's a blue charm. Blue charm's probably one of the best known flies there is for salmon, but it just seems like I hook most of my fish on that, and it's not like, I don't know if it's mental, and it's like I'm ready for it because I'm like, okay, I got a blue charm on, I'm gonna hook one, and maybe like I'm just more focused on my cast and what I'm doing. Maybe it's kind of like that. It's just in the back of your head, kind of, and you just pay a little bit more attention. I'm not sure, but there's.
I mean, yeah,
there's something to be said about
the fish know if you have. The fish don't know if you have confidence, but I mean, if you just have that extra bit of awareness and you're ready.
Yeah, I think I agree. So, Jakob, why don't you give us an introduction to yourself? Like I said, I mean, Jakob is a really great nymph fisher, so I definitely want you to talk about that, and maybe just kind of give me an introduction to how you kind of got into it as well.
Well, I started salmon fishing, so about 6 years ago. I live right on a river here in Nova Scotia that's one of the more popular ones for salmon, and every fall I just see people from everywhere come to the river and fishing steady all day, every day in October, and I pretty much just decided to hop right in. Definitely low-hauled a few people on my first days out before I knew how to fish, really. But yeah, and then like obviously over a few years I started finding like the spots, see lots of fish, and they're hard to catch, and I kind of transitioned into like fishing more complicated techniques I learned from some of my good friends with nymphing.
Yep.
That's probably the most effective method of fishing for trout there is. So it's used by like competitive anglers all over the world. So yeah, started learning that. Still learning. It's extremely hard, but
yeah. Oh yeah, nymph fishing is difficult now, and it's funny because I mentioned to a couple different people about fishing with you there last summer, and I mean, I just kind of got into the idea of nymph fishing, and like I was kind of successful in certain lakes I fish, and then I went out with Jakob, and I was humbled real fast. I mean, I remember I was the first one to be able to get the fly in the water first, and Jacob's like, set, and I'm like setting, I don't even know, I didn't notice anything. And he did it like 3 times. I had to ask him, I was like, okay, what am I missing, man? And he just gives me like the little subtle tips and stuff, but super effective when you start paying attention. It's like how many hits you get on a nymph is like, a lot more than what you would get. But I mean, for me, being kind of like a newbie to the nymph fishing and like still kind of getting the motions down, I was missing a lot of fish, but it was just like, it was crazy Like just
Well, I mean, yeah.
and how big of a fish will hit such a small nymph. That really got to me. But I think what we should do first is, if anyone's not familiar with nymph fishing, maybe Jacob, you can kind of explain to them like what nymph fishing is, because we're assuming that people know. But I mean, we might have a lot of people here that don't fly fish. So what is nymph fishing?
Well, nymph fishing, you're basically trying to imitate an insect. So, for example, if mayflies are hatching, their fish are rising to the mayflies. You would still probably be more effective imitating a mayfly, but as it would be just hatching, so it's on the bottom of the river. So basically, the main objective is you're wanting to have your flies close to bottom as you can, like drifting through fast water where the bugs are hatching. And I mean, fish feeding on nymphs are way more active than dries. I think dries maybe 15-20% of the fish's diet, but they're almost always feeding on some sort of nymph, whether they're coming out from under the rocks or just like caddis, which sit on top of the rocks. Like, all that can be so effective, as opposed to waiting for them to come up top, and which really only happens once in a while. Like, how often are you consistently having good dry fly fishing? Not very often.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because most people, when they think fly fishing, they're thinking like on the surface, a mayfly hatch or a caddis hatch. But really, like you said, the majority of the fish feeding that's being done is kind of like on nymphs and larvae and things that are still on the bottom or on their way to the surface to become a dry fly. That's mostly where trout do their feeding. So I think that's kind of important, and that's why it's such a great technique, because like you said, that's the majority of their diet are these bugs on the bottom or coming up to the surface. So I think that's why nymph fishing is so successful.
And like a lot of people, like, I mean, obviously, like, I've caught browns that are 20-23 inches on like a size 20 nymph, and I think a lot of guys are just deterred from the fact of fishing such small flies. But
yeah,
really, when you think about it, these big fish that aren't, like, especially brown trout that aren't overly active in the daytime, they're not gonna swim 6-7 feet up and go crazy for a dry very, very often. They're only feeding under the surface every now and then. You can get them on dries, like I do a few times a year, have good dry fly fishing for them. But no, I mean, if you're putting a nymph that looks even just, that's another thing. Like, most of the nymphs I fish and catch lots of browns on, they're more of like an attractor pattern, is what like a lot of competition guys call them. So it's not like I'm not always imitating something, it's more so getting something that looks good to the fish in a lane where they're feeding, and they're going to take it more than they won't.
Interesting. All right, nice. Let's ask. I'm going to ask Chris a question. Chris, what type of fly fishing do you prefer? Like, do you kind of prefer nymph fishing, or what's your take on it? Like, do you like streamers or dry fly? What's your take on it?
Am I in right now? Because I'm not. I think I'm still backstage. Oh, I'm in the check. Okay. Sorry, my surface is here.
No, that's fine.
We trout fish in Labrador. We kind of go through these predominant, like, what we're doing at a certain time of year. So, like, predominantly first of the season, early June, we're doing, streamers, and then like big stuff, articulated, like bull trout kind of style flies. And then we kind of drop into the nymphs, indicator nymphing, heavy, like, split shots and check nymphs and Euro style nymphs and multiple fly rigs. And then, like, it's all relevant to like what's happening. And I think the biggest thing is, as a guide and an angler, is that you have to adapt to these things. And then after that, the streamers and nymphs still kind of like are in like the background, but then the dries hit on. And then when you're fishing, when the fish are on dries, you're gonna fish dries unless like it's absolutely crazy. The hatch is so thick, the fish is gonna like have a hard time. Like, what are the chances that fish is gonna take your fly when there's thousands of others? And then you work a nymph on a figure eight retrieve, or you'll just strip a woolly bugger. Or then you get it, like, later on in the season, you get into the dry dropper stuff, like we did the new fly fisher show with caddis and caddis emergers, and the same thing can be done with mayflies and mayfly emergers. But I mean, I think I don't really have a favorite, really. I mean, I really am a big fan of big streamers. The bigger the better, and the heavier the better. Catch a lot of big fish that way when the timing's right. But I mean, to say you have a favorite, like, you're not going to fish a streamer in like lower water conditions or whatever.
Mm.
So I think being adaptive to conditions and like adjusting like your mind, and if you get stuck on one thing, I think that like reduces your productivity as an angler. But of course, like, you're gonna have a favorite, and like I said, my favorite's big streamers. Like, I'm lucky enough that I get to enjoy Labrador brook trout, and there's nothing I love more than myself or a client catching, a 20+ inch brook trout on the biggest, like 6, 7, up to 10-inch streamers. So just those eats are so gnarly and ferocious. They just come out of the depths and just smack it like a double deceiver on a fast strip on a sunny day, and they just come up and whack it. And then to get them on a figure 8, like you're musky fishing, oh my God. Like, my client got a 23.5-inch brook trout on a sex dungeon on figure 8 by the boat last season. And that was probably one of the most unbelievable like brook trout streamer eats I've ever seen. And just like, I guess that's something we talked about, like we talked about before the show, is like adapting like new techniques, and like bringing techniques and tactics from across the world or even across species, and applying those to other species. Like, I'm sure Jakob can talk on this a bit, but like doing like the roly-poly for Atlantic salmon, like you do in like lock stop competition, or like I said, your figure 8, bringing it from musky or pike fishing into the brook trout world. Dry dropper, in some places where it's legal, dry dropper for Atlantic salmon. Like, it happens. Like in the UK, they fish 2-fly rigs, and I mean, I think the biggest thing is like being broad and adaptive, and like trying new things, but also like appreciating the old school and the current way to do things. I think that's a big part of fly fishing, especially with the social media generation. I think it's an interesting tactic, interesting idea.
Yeah. No, I definitely enjoy fishing big streamers too. I mean, they just hit so hard, and I mean, generally, if you're fishing big streamers, like most of the time, like your fish is going to be a bigger size, obviously, bigger food source. You're not going to get smaller fish trying to hit that bigger fly. It's happened.
But like Jacob said, then you also catch the same brown trout in the middle of the day on a size 20 nymph, but early in the morning or later in the night, that same brown trout will crush like a 6-inch long streamer. So that's like, you got to be adaptive. You're not going to toss like a dirty meat fly in like low water condition or like medium water conditions in the middle of the day, but you may,
you're right.
Earlier or later in the day, right?
Yeah. You're right. Like, I mean, it's all about adapting to the situation. Like you said, I mean, you gotta read the water. Like, I usually try not to tie a fly on until I kind of get there and see what's going on. So yeah, I definitely see your point there. Jakob, what do you think to, like, if you could speak to like adapting to conditions? Like, I know you like to fish the nymph a lot, but is there, like, what's another kind of technique that you like? And I mean, you can speak to trout or salmon, or I know you got a salmon obsession there, like a lot of other fly fishermen. So, what other kind of techniques do you think?
Well, from a competitive standpoint, being able to adapt as quick as possible is 100% the most important thing, just for anyone wanting to catch fish. I mean, like, if you're really out there catching numbers, you got to adapt. Like, sometimes all it takes is switching one thing and everything can change. Like, it's a lot of times trout, put on a thinner leader or smaller flies. Like, one thing that's overlooked and not a lot of people pay attention to is the bead color of flies.
Oh.
So when you're fishing nymphs, like, the bead color can change everything. I've had days where I've fished a copper bead on maybe a size 16 or 18 for hours and caught a few fish, and then switched to like something a lot more subtle that wouldn't reflect as much sunlight, like black or matte black, and just once again just a whole bunch of fish in a short period of time. And sometimes it can be the opposite. Sometimes you can go from a black to a silver bead, or in like completely different to a streamer, or even a dry, and try and trigger like a reaction bite, because a lot of times if fish are really pounded over and pounded and pounded and pounded, you're probably not going to get them the conventional way. So fishing to or swim is something huge can always work.
Yeah.
A big streamer or a dry, like skating on the surface.
Yeah. So like at what point would you think, okay, it's time to change? Like, do you like mentally have like, okay, I'm going to fish this many casts with this? Like, what's kind of like in your perspective, and Chris, you can answer this after Jacob, like when do you think like, okay, it's time to change it up, whether it's a different fly or different size? Like what helps you to make that decision?
Probably having confidence in how I'm fishing and not catching. It's like, I'm not a professional by any means, but I mean, if I'm nymph fishing for hours not catching anything, and I'm confident enough that I'm doing stuff right, I'm on the bottom, fished a bunch of flies over the fish, then I know this is not what I should be doing. So I would have switched. Hopefully I don't go hours doing that, but
yeah.
Just like salmon fishing. I mean, if you're doing one thing for hours and it's not working, you probably should switch it up. And if you pursue one thing for days and days, it's bound to work, but that's not really how I like to fish. So
Right.
Definitely adapting is very important.
Okay, yeah. What about you, Chris? At what point do you say enough of this? It's time to change up and try a different fly or different size? Like, what's your take on that? Chris may be a little bit delayed there. Chris, you still with us there? All right, we dropped Chris for a minute. That's okay. We'll move on, and when Chris comes back, maybe we'll ask him the same question. So tell us about your experience with competitions, Jacob. Like, I thought that was really interesting when you told me, because I wasn't even aware there were like such teams, like the Team Youth Canada and whatnot. So like, how did you get involved in that? Let's start with that. How did you get involved with that?
Well, probably the guy who's taught me most about trout fishing, Ken McCauley, is also a competitive trout fisherman. Besides myself, the only other one in Atlantic Canada. And he's up from Antigonish, where I live, and I fish him a lot. And like the techniques he showed me have been developed by like some of the best competitive teams in the world, like Spain, like a lot of the Europe teams, France. So we're fishing with techniques they've been using for years and years. And so I mean, yeah, he hosted a small competition in Nova Scotia 3 or 4 years ago that I did, and it was kind of fun. I liked the vibe of it, just trying to catch as many fish as possible. And then obviously Nova Scotia, there's not a huge competitive scene. There's really no one. But yeah, so about like a year later, after like practicing a lot and stuff, I learned about there's a youth nationals that was happening in BC. So I contemplated whether I wanted to go or not. So I ended up like applying to be in that, and I got in. And I got on a team with 3 other kids from out west, so 1 from Alberta and 2 from BC. And they were awesome. Practiced really hard coming up to it. Fished a lot of different techniques, because in BC we fished for mainly whitefish and cutthroat trout in the rivers, and then the lakes rainbows. Yeah, so I mean, it ended up, we did win. It was a 2-day. We won by, it's called placing points. So we won by placing points. So how it works is all the teams are divided into groups. So like my team, I was in group A with a group with another person from each of the other teams. So you're not competing against the whole field of anglers. It's just the anglers in your group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's not like, so if there's 100 people, it would be divided into 10 groups, and if I was in, say, Group A, I'd be only competing against the other guys in Group A. So my goal is to catch more fish than them, which would give me 1 placing point, and it's kind of like golf. You want to have as low as you can.
Right.
So I think the individual winner, actually first and second place at that competition, were both on my team. I think they tied with 14 placing points each. And I was just off. I had one session where it was really bad. It was hailing, like -3, and just windy as hell. So it was pretty tough. But yeah, it was definitely a success in my first like big competition. So it really got me into it, and I wanted to continue doing it. So a few months later, there was another competition in BC called the North American Lock Style Championship. So that was my first international competition. I think there were teams from U.S. There was a team with a bunch of guys from all over Ireland and obviously Canada. It was amazing. We fished the interior lakes in BC, which are like world renowned for big fish, and they are probably some of the hardest fighting and most difficult fish to land. There were times there where I was like, wow, if I could be fishing at 8 weight right now or 9 weight, I would just pure power. I fished pretty good in that competition, and so did my team, and we placed we placed 5th out of 9 or 10 teams. We ended up beating like Team Ireland and a couple of the US teams. It was awesome international experience, and I was able to get like points through that kind of secured my place on the youth team to represent Canada at the World Championships in Bosnia, which I'd be leaving to in about 5 days if we didn't get trampled by some virus. But
yeah,
it's all good. Next year.
Yeah, next year. Right.
Yeah.
So, is there anything you learned there, like doing competitions that you kind of brought back to Nova Scotia and like, oh wow, that really works here?
Well, when I was fishing in BC, like just in terms of like when I fished, I got to practice with some of the Team Ireland guys like the days prior to the lake competition I had in October, and just the amount like I learned in a few hours was like crazy, just so much. And then fishing on rivers the few months before at nationals completely changed my whole fishing. Like I was able to, and when you learn stuff like that, it builds up your confidence, and you're able to transfer that to your home rivers. And I fished so much better ever since then. River fishing has improved a lot, and there's a whole lot of lake fishing here for trout. But yeah, definitely learned a lot, and like it's improved my skills drastically.
Yeah. Well, you showed me a thing or two last year, so thank you again for that.
It's a good time.
Yeah, no, it was. Well, it looks like Chris was there, but we lost him again. There's we got a question coming in. So it says, I am from Terrace, BC, the famous Skeena River. Anyone ever fished salmon there? I haven't. I would love to. Jakob, have you? Or
well, about 3 years ago, if you asked me if I was ever going to go to BC fish, I would say I would only go there to fish steelhead, but I ended up going there to fish rivers and for trout and lakes for steelhead or for big trout. But no, if I could fish the Skeena River, I would in a heartbeat. I'd love to fish steelhead there. I've never fished salmon there, but steelhead would be amazing.
Yeah. So, all right, we're gonna move on until Chris gets back. I mean, he's on the move there down Marquee, so I don't know what his
pretty bad service.
I'd imagine. So why don't you we know you're obsessed with salmon fishing. I know you can go on and on and on. What are your thoughts on salmon fishing in Nova Scotia compared to other places? Because I know you were at Glen Eden Lodge, a really prestigious lodge there on the Resticouche, right? In New Brunswick.
Yeah.
And I mean, huge, crazy fish there, and like a totally different style. So how can you kind of compare like other provinces to us? Like, what's special, I guess, about the salmon fishing in Nova Scotia compared to everywhere else?
Well, the biggest difference and the most important to probably everyone who fishes here is the fact that it's all public, not private water. You can access all of it through any land you want. So I mean, that right there is probably the main attraction. Like, I know, but I think when it comes to differences, the fish are different. Our fish are smaller, but I think there's always the chance of a big fish here. I think there's more differences, like the fishing styles are completely different, really. I think come like late May, you can be fishing on the Rescue or the Cascapedi or the Matapedi, all those rivers on the Gaspé that have runs of fish that are coming in the second week of May that are fish of a lifetime. I mean, if you're lucky enough to get there that time, and if you hook a fish, it's going to be big. My buddy was there recently, and since it's closed to a lot of residents, they had some prime water to themselves and a very few other anglers for 3 or 4 days, and they hooked 4 or 5 fish that were all, the guide all claimed to be like 40 pounds. Just realistically, that's not happening in Nova Scotia.
Yeah. So you don't think those fish exist in Nova Scotia anymore, or you just think they're too hard to catch, or why do you say that?
Well, I have buddies that have fished the Marguerite for a long time, and I mean, there were times when they would consistently catch a few 30-ish pounders every year, but that's tapered off. I mean, a lot of those big fish are towards the end of their life, really. Like, salmon don't live forever. They do survive for quite a while for being a fish, but yeah, I don't think there's no number of big fish here. There's fish that are 20 pounds, and a 20-pound fish is really big.
Yeah.
There's lots of those, but when you're getting into 30, 35, 40, and even a chance at a 50-pounder, it's not really realistic to really bank on getting one of those here.
And why do you think that is?
Well, I don't have a perfect answer for that, but the strains of fish in the Rescue, a lot of the Gaspé rivers have always been bigger. Like, if you go back and look at pictures from 50 or 60 years ago, the Marguerite, they're not pulling out fish 30 pounds. They're pulling out the same size we're catching now. Maybe maybe more of the odd bigger one, but we are just never really a big fish province. There's rivers like the St. Mary's that is closed to salmon fishing, but they have probably the only run of springers in Nova Scotia, which are basically fish coming in earlier than the main run of salmon would in all the rivers that are 20, probably some of them are touching 30 pounds. But that's really it when it comes to big fish in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, so you think it's just a genetic thing? The fish here genetically just aren't as big.
Yeah, well, yeah. When it comes down to it, that's what it is. I mean, the rest of the fish aren't known for big fish, and they're having strength, genes of having big fish. So they're coming back year after year. It's not like every now and again a bunch of big fish are caught. Consistently big fish.
Yeah. So we got a question here. Do you ever get concerned with Fukushima? It is still a concern out west. The tsunami from 2011 Japan. I don't really know much about that, but I guess from what I remember, I think something like the tsunami had some kind of effects on the river, because I think it reached Vancouver. No, it was something to do with the nuclear power plant, I think it had something to do with that, like the tsunami waters carried radiation or something like that. I don't know if that would really affect us. When you were out in BC, did you was that a concern when you were out there doing competition? Did that ever come up?
Not that I heard of. Maybe just to clarify, people who aren't from Atlantic Canada, we are talking about Atlantic salmon. I'm sure there's probably a few people from, I think that guy's from BC, but we're talking about Atlantic salmon, so that's a bit different than Pacific, the ones you guys see out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think can be done to kind of help salmon fishing in Nova Scotia? What are your thoughts on that?
Erase all social media. But well, when it comes, I think there's a lot of things that we are doing. Some would say we're doing as much as we can, but there's not a whole lot you can do when all the anglers that want to say something about it are the ones that are releasing fish, fighting them hard, so they're going back fine. They're not targeting them when they shouldn't be. But it really comes down to every individual fish, because we don't have crazy numbers like rivers and Rush or some of the Gaspé rivers do. The salmon are borderline endangered here. When you really think about it, there's not if 5 fish being killed in a river system in the North Shore of Nova Scotia can easily affect way bigger than people would think.
Mhm.
Like if you take 2 or 3 big female salmon out of a river, you're killing the potential of 5 or 6,000 salmon to return in a few years. So right there, that's just, it really comes down to just respecting all the fish, the individual ones. Doesn't really matter where you catch them.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts on any regulation changes? Because I got like my own thoughts on it, and I mean just opinions really. Like it's my opinion, you know.
Well,
I mean, I definitely think there's regulations that are kind of outdated. I think they're kind of outdated. I think it's time,
for sure.
especially if we're going to start promoting Nova Scotia as, the sport fishing in Nova Scotia, especially for salmon and trout. I think that things are going to have to change. That's just my opinion. But what are your thoughts on that? And what would you suggest as a regulation change?
Well, recently they came out saying how over the past few years that you could have been fishing a barb hook, you could have been fishing a double, because when they were making the rules, they pretty much didn't really go over the fishery act, you could say. So they kind of added things in that couldn't have been added in legally. So now we're allowed to fish doubles, barbed. Barbed is a bit questionable, but I think double should have never been banned, because they're, in my opinion, and I'm sure people disagree and some would agree, that if you hook a fish on a double, one thing, you're going to have more confidence fighting the fish. You're going to fight it harder, probably get it in way quicker. The hook is going to go in there. So if you have a single here, and you put that into a fish, it's going to wiggle around, creating an even bigger hole. But obviously, if you put a double in, it's in there firm. It's not going to move around. I think doubles swim better in the water too. It really comes down, but at the end of the day, you can land salmon a lot of ways and a lot of different flies, whatever. And if you're not handling the fish right, all that doesn't matter. You need to. That's by far the most important, is just handling the fish right and immediate release of the fish. And I think there's some things that, if you're really worried about the salmon, like fishing in the spring should be shut down. Although the water is good, there's lots of oxygen in the water, it's cold and high, it's good for the fish, but I think they should just be given a break. Like they're in there all winter. Just let them get out. I mean, you have from June to October to target them. This is how you get people going, but I don't think there's any need to fish them when they're cows. Some of them are like the river fillet fish. They're so strong and they're in great shape, but I don't know. I just think they deserve to have a little rest and easy exit to the river, or easy exit of the river back to the ocean to feed.
Yeah. That's kind of, I want to kind of touch on that too, because that's one of the things that I think could probably change is tighter regulations on the salmon rivers. Why not just make it fly fishing only until like June 1st, or why not just open a spring fishery like they have it in New Brunswick and make you buy a salmon license, and then, or maybe even a separate one, maybe like an early salmon license or something, so that you're drawing more, revenue, more money into the province, right? And maybe even pulling people from other provinces in, and it kind of works out economically, better for the province. But I definitely think, it still shocks me how, we know that salmon are endangered, and we know that our rivers here, some of them have really big sea trout and brown trout and stuff, that these rivers aren't a little bit more regulated. And just being able to throw like a Rapala with 2 treble hooks on it when there's still kind of kelts in the river is just kind of, it doesn't really make sense to me, And I just never really understood that. But
I've only been fishing for 6 years. I don't understand it either, but it's because no one will, like, there's people where I live, they're not going to listen to that. You tell them they can't go out and fish worms in the bottom, or fish bait, or fish a spinner with the trebles. They're not going to listen to that.
Yeah.
They'll do it till they get fined, and then they'll probably continue doing it. It really comes down to when everything's going to basically restart with anglers, like the conservation-minded anglers like us, who are the old ones.
Yeah.
Showing,
and I mean, nothing against guys who fish lures or bait. That's not, we're not trying to shoot down anyone that does that.
No.
Because I still do that. I grew up doing that. But I just think, when we're talking like salmon rivers, where, the salmon rivers that are actually designated as salmon rivers that we can fish in the fall, I think that they need to have a little bit tighter regulation. There's still plenty of other rivers around the province that have nice fish that you can fish lure and bait all year, but I think like the major ones like River Phillip, Marguerite, I think they need to have tighter regulations. And Chris is back. So welcome back, man. You went dark on us there for a bit. But we'll let you hop in here. We've been just kind of talking about salmon a bit in your absence, and we talked a little bit about like the differences between provinces. So I was hoping you would chime in on this because Jakob was kind of saying like other provinces seem to have bigger fish, and it's probably genetic wise, like Resticouche and stuff like that. And we were saying like we don't see many like 40 pounders here. But what about Labrador? Because like you guide up there and you guide at Crooks Lake and Flowers River, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are like prestigious, like well-known lodges. Yeah, watersheds that produce big fish. So, like, what's the average? Like, what's a big fish up there in Labrador, and like, how does it kind of compare to NS? How does it compare to here in Nova Scotia?
Yeah, no, sorry, I had to get on some better Wi-Fi. My data wasn't working, so I just had to drive to the cabin. But yeah, so I apologize for that right now. But
No
on
worries,
that topic, a lot of it, without getting into too much depth, a lot of it is really due to colonization and human impact on populations, and then of course you have genetics and river size is one thing. You look at the Resticouche, that's a huge river. The St. John River in New Brunswick had huge fish, but then also you look at rivers like the St. Mary's, who is primarily known for big fish and early runs, and then you look at the Miramichi. Well, St. Mary's the same way. Two different, like there's multiple genetic strains in the St. Mary's, as is on the Miramichi. So you have like the Rocky Brook strain, the Serpentine run, whatever. And then you have your Grills run, and then your regular salmon run. So it's interesting when you look at genetics that way, like not necessarily river by river, but also tributary by tributary. And to comment on the Labrador thing, I think it's a lot of it's colonization. You look at that thing, like amount of like years humans have been active, or to the extent of how they've been active in a watershed. But it's interesting in Labrador, we speak about brook trout. I think there's like a band across like between the 52nd and 53rd parallel, and just north of the 53rd parallel now. There's like a band of like what like our region that will produce big brook trout through like like perfect environmental conditions, whether it be like geology or like hatches. I think food source is a big thing to do with that, but also growth season, and like where is that sweet spot when it comes to like latitude and how it's moving north now. We're seeing warmer summers and things like that. So I think in the next coming years you'll see that band of big brook trout starting in like Menippi and then going north to like the Mealy Mountain range. You're going to see that move. Hopefully you'll see that move north as this happens, or maybe it's happening too quick. They're not going to be able to adapt. I really don't think that's going to happen. I think that I think it's going to be able to like work that way. I think that's natural progression for anything. If you look across North America, everything's moving north. It's a not just climate change, but it's a natural occurrence. And these big fish bands are these like perfect scenarios when it comes to environment and climate. I think that's like a northward trend. You look at populations like striped bass and American eel and everything moving. Atlantic salmon, perfect example. Things are moving north. So I think there's a lot of information and a lot of reasons why fish get big in places, but I really think a lot of it is environmental. obviously, and genetics that plays into it. Because it kind of goes hand in hand, like they adapt, and selection occurs in populations differently comparative to, like, look at the St. Mary's, or the Marguerite, for example, good example. And then you look at like the Liscum River and geology, and how bedrock geology affects soil composition, and then affects water quality when it comes to acidity. Like, you don't have that issue on the Marguerite, but you do on the Liscum, and it's within the same band or same region, but it's apples and oranges, really. So there's a lot to that topic, obviously. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like, everything's so site specific. It's hard to say, put a finger on it.
Okay, so what would, like, up there, what would like a big salmon be? Because me and Jakob were saying, like, 20, 25 pounds big salmon here. What's big for Labrador?
Depends on the river you're on. Of course, it's the same as here. There's big salmon rivers and small salmon rivers. You look at Newfoundland, primarily grills. But a lot of those rivers are small, maybe even Nova Scotia size, but they predominantly have a grills run. Then you have rivers like the Humber, which is a really big river that is known for big salmon. So obviously that's environment, climate, and genetics together. And then in Labrador, you have big fish rivers like the Hunt River, the Flowers River, which I guide on, the Eagle River. And then you still have some big salmon coming into these smaller rivers. But it's an interesting thing, like a big salmon up there. I saw a fish 40 pounds last year, but that was like it was kind of like an outlier. There's a lot of 30 pounders, and then you'll still have your grills, but and you'll catch your 8 pounders and your 10 pounders and your 15 pounders. But that upper level, I think it's interesting to think, like, it's not necessarily in that case, because it's such a pristine population that factors, like human influencing factors on the population, especially as it was in its rawest form when it was first exploited or discovered. I won't use exploited, but for the purpose of comparing an untouched population to a fish population. Population pyramids, you have your bigger fish here, and then eventually that tapers down, as people kill fish and things like that. So it impacts genetics that way. So I think that's why in smaller rivers in Labrador, like the Flowers, it's only salmon can only go like 40 kilometers in that river. You're seeing 40 pounders, but like on the St. Mary's, the biggest salmon ever caught was 35, and it's 150 kilometers long. So I think it's compounded that way. And then if we want to touch on brook trout, it's all about that, big brook trout band. Menippi, used to have 10 pounders, still has a couple, 9 pounders, 8 pounders. But then Crooks Lake, you get fish 26 inches, 7.5, 8 pounds, but it's different. It's the same as here. You look at like the North Shore versus the Eastern Shore versus, Cape Breton. It's interesting that way because, some rivers are similar, some rivers aren't. And, I think you'll see similarities in fish sizes and fish, population age structure, and obviously in similar watersheds.
So, yeah, I mean, one of the things that really sticks out in my mind, just seeing some of your content and watching you on the new fly fishing and stuff, is the brook trout, like monsters. Like, like you said, like 8 pound, like that's almost unheard of here in Nova Scotia. Now, I mean, I would assume that's probably just because it's like you said, like untouched waters, like no one's back there, no one's messing with them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at Nova Scotia compared to Labrador, we had big brook trout at one time. We had 26-inch brook trout in Nova Scotia that weren't sea runs at one time. We still have sea runs that are that big, but like I said, it kind of goes back to colonization, and that and maybe like the band isn't shifting northward, but maybe it's kind of like coming up from the bottom, because Maine, Maine's still producing really big brook trout too.
Yeah,
I think that's environmental and conservation on that thing. And not saying Nova Scotia's not doing enough, but it's kind of like the perfect storm of why the whole thing is like a perfect storm of, like, producing big fish. But yeah, like, big trout like that, you're not catching them every day either up there too. Like I said, the population pyramid, you have your small fish on the bottom, your medium fish, your big fish, and it goes up with age. I think a big thing up there is like how long brook trout live in Labrador. I think there's been fish at Minipie reported living up to 15 years, and the average here is 5 to 7 years. And a 7-year-old brook trout is an old fish here in Nova Scotia. So I think that plays into it too, and that's genetics as well. And maybe, not as much retention pressure or angling pressure in general. I mean, it's hard to make judgments on that without, evidence, but generally, I mean, that's probably what is influencing that. But yeah, the big brook trout up there, it's unbelievable. Like, I think our average last year was like 4.5 pounds or something like that at Crooks Lake.
God. Yeah.
And I think our biggest fish we caught last year, or in my boat anyways, we didn't weigh it. It was 24.5 inches, which is a pretty big brook trout. And it's interesting too, I've had a debate or, conversations about pike and brook trout, and I really am a huge proponent of, I think that, the reason I think it's that perfect storm, like I said earlier, is like predation and, that competition. There's not, like, you don't get the big brook trout in lakes in Labrador that don't have pike. Now, most lakes have pike, but some lakes don't. And you don't get those huge, 7, 8, 9, 10 pounders in lakes that don't have pike. So the competition between brook trout and pike is something that's been instilled within, competition between the two species going on for, hundreds and maybe 1,000 years, right? So that's part of it too. And now you say, okay, well, why aren't brook trout competing against chain pickerel like the pike? And that's a different situation altogether. And I won't dive into that. But I think in order to have big brook trout, I think you need that, competition between those two apex predators in the lake.
And why do you need that competition? Like, what exactly is it about the competition that makes these fish grow so big?
I think, now this is speculation possibly, but I think it's, that, like, because brook trout will eat small pike and pike will eat small brook trout, and even big brook trout. Obviously, they get bigger. Our biggest at Crooks Lake was 44 inches, 21 pounds. But I think it's just that need to feed and to get bigger to compete the pike. And I don't know if this is true or not. Labrador brook trout are known for having huge humpbacks. Some people say it's a selective morphology, so the pike can't fit them in their mouth. I'm not sure if I subscribe to that thought or not. It's a possibility. Generally, the humpback is a sexual dimorphism trait for males to attract females, but it also could probably play into that. I'm not entirely sure. But, like, if you want, okay, it depends on what you want. Do you want big trout or do you want a lot of trout? Because if you're going to have a lake that doesn't have pike, your max size is going to go down, and probably your average is going to go down too. But if you have pike in a lake, maybe your population isn't going to be as high, because I guess pike, reduce the carrying capacity of the lake to like a certain, like, you're still going to have, like, say if the lake has 500 trout and you introduce pike, probably going to, or not introduce pike, but if there's pike in that lake, they're probably going to have 250 trout, but the average size or max size is going to be way higher because, you're going to have pike eating those smaller trout. That's less competition between trout. So then that forces trout to get big quick. And you see it at Minipie. Minipie has huge pike. World records come out of there. Crooks Lake has big trout, has pike. Igloo Lake has big trout, has pike. And I'm sure, like I said, everything's, it's scenario specific, but at the same time, that's that deciding factor. that really produces those really, really, really big brook trout. And then there's a lake called Awesome Lake in Labrador, that has big trout too, 3, 4, and maybe 5 pounders. And like traditionally, like in the past, I mean, I had 6 pounders, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but they never really had those 7, 8, 9 pounders. Isn't that same, perfect storm scenario? But they don't have pike. So is that the limiting factor? And that, is it food? I'm not entirely sure. But I think that's a huge role. I think they play a huge role in producing big brook trout.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think you may be onto something, but like I said, I mean, obviously studies would have to be done and whatever. But I definitely see where you're coming from, because I mean, the trout would have to, like you said, compete. So they're eating more because they know, like, I got to get big fast or I'm going to get taken out here, kind of thing. Maybe that just over time, like they just evolved to be that way.
Yeah, and it's not something like what we're seeing in Nova Scotia right now with the chain pickerel and brook trout, and like to compare that to what's been happening in Labrador for generations. I mean, like, that is not comparable. So to try to like understand or justify my point by comparing it to Nova Scotia standards, like, that's 100 years that pickerel's been here, and they're not in that perfect storm. They're not like, we've limited max size of brook trout, and we have so much different pressures on brook trout, whether that be climate, human directly by harvesting or angling pressure, or it's industry. So like, that's a different beast altogether. But there was big brook trout before humans got to Labrador, and there was always pike. So I mean, you start killing pike, you're going to start seeing smaller trout.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's ask Jakob a question here. What about you, Jakob? Like, you fish a lot of trout here. Like, what are your thoughts on, kind of like, we get some good sea run trout here. We get some big sea run trout here, but we don't see a lot of big resident trout. No. Do you think that it's kind of like overfishing, environmental? Like, I know we got problems with it, like, acidity in our water and stuff like that. But even like, Cape Breton's a great fishery. Like, I grew up fishing Cape Breton, all kinds of nice trout, but most of them came from the Bredor lakes, like the brooks and rivers I fished. I didn't fish too many freshwater lakes, but even when I did, with like hiking back to these lakes where no one was, you just never saw like a really big trout, like resident freshwater trout. So what's your take on that?
I think that, like, obviously our trout here are predominantly sea run, like sea run browns. Brookies have probably outnumbered residents by 100 times. But I've not been around long enough to really say too much, but I don't think, I know Chris's area, like in Stillwater there, I don't think there's, where I fish, I don't think there's ever been a major amount of resident fish. And if there has been, they're probably gone due to overfishing. That's my thought anyways. I think there's so many more sea run fish, and that the resident fish that were here are probably gone due to angling.
Yeah. So let's talk fly tying a bit, because I mean, you guys are two great fly tyers. What are like some of your favorite materials to tie with, Jakob? Like, what's a good material? Maybe like a new material that's out, or anything like that. Like, what can you talk about that a bit? Or is it a secret?
No. Well, I've kind of hopped into.
If it's a secret, just make something up.
No,
the tube trend, okay.
Yeah, so tying lots. Well, I don't know if it's a trend or not, but tying lots of tubes lately. Inspired by like the Scandinavian style of fishing and fishing a lot of those big rivers. And I think it will be something that, like, I've caught lots of fish on tubes, but I think I'm going to start fishing them more in different styles. I think it'll be something that will be effective, because when you go to the Marguerite, how many people have a size 6 or size 8 black bear, green butter, undertaker, or blue charm on? Like 75% of people. How many people have a 5-inch long Patagorva big red 2 fly on? I'd be the only one probably. So I mean, I think when it comes down to it, fishing something that's so different will definitely have a good impact on your fish numbers for salmon at least.
Yeah, and
I guess in terms of materials, like tying tubes, I use a lot of like dubbing and like slashy stuff, and I use like temple dog and fox, all that long soft hair.
what are the what's the advantage of tying fishing with a tube fly, or is it just kind of more just for looks, or is there a certain advantage? Or
no, I mean, well, let me see here. Well, when tubes, I could fish like something like this. This is a banana.
oh, I like that.
The big yellow thing. I mean, if you were to tie that on the hook's going to be this long with a gap this big. Then I could fish this on a tube with a hook, with any size hook I want. So it's better for the fish. I like getting the fly in. The fly's way up to the leader, so you're not worried about destroying your fly. Just a little hook. If the hook gets dull, you just switch out the hook. Okay, I mean, yeah, it's great. I find it super convenient. It's a little tricky sometimes tying them, but
yeah, can you show like a close up of the fly and kind of tell people how it works if they're not familiar with like a tube fly? Like, you know, you can maybe show them how it actually works, how you'd rig it up. You don't have to show us your secret tube fly.
This is my secret. So it's tied on a tube, as you can tell there. So
little plastic tube. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically you'll take your leader and tie on whatever leader you fish. I usually just fish straight 12 or 15 pound maximum. You run it through the tube. So the head of the tube there, and you come out at the end, and I just slide it off. Then I'll tie on whatever tube fly hook I'm using. I know guys fish like those Gamakatsu, like little circle hooks, which are great.
Yeah.
Those, and I fish like small double tube hooks, and I don't really have any on me, but
yeah,
just like small hooks like these.
Right. Yeah.
So you'll bring the leader through and tie the hook on and pull it back through the tube so the fly is sitting flat, so it swims nicely. And generally, when you hook a fish, the tube comes off the hook and slides up. So it's just the hook on the fish. I think if everyone fished tubes, the landing rate of salmon would be way higher. Because I've never lost a fish on a tube in my life.
Because the hooks would have, I guess, less leverage because they're not as long.
Yeah.
Is that right in my thinking? Yeah. So
yeah, exactly.
So they wouldn't have the leverage to throw the hook. Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right when you say sometimes just mixing it up, because I see that. I've seen that a lot, just like spin fishing, like smallmouth bass and stuff. It's you're trying all these things, and then like you're fishing, trying to match the hatch of all these, like bait fish and whatever in the water. And I was fishing with on numerous occasions. The same guy I fished with, and he started throwing like a pink, like bubblegum pink, big long worm. It looks nothing like what they're feeding on, and they just go crazy. It's just like popping them off. So I think there's something to be said, and I think that that can apply to fly fishing too, especially on a river like the Marguerite, where fish has seen how many flies a day.
Yeah,
the same fly. How many blue charms, right?
I was just featuring like an article in the Atlantic Salmon Journal, and it was about fishing on the Marguerite. And the author Monty did a really good job of like pointing out how fishing on public water, such as the Marguerite, is just such a good way to improve your salmon fishing skills. I mean, like some of these guys who are arguably the best salmon fishermen in the world, like Topher Brown, Mike Crosby, all these guys who are all just amazing fishermen. They all fish the Marguerite, and to go into a pool that's been fished by at peak time in the season, say late June, early July, that's been fished through by 20 people. And if you're able to know what you're doing in order to have success, you'll learn so much. And then go fish a river like the Restigouche or the Cascapedia, where it's private and only a select number of people are fishing on it. You're a massive advantage, because you know how fish are going to behave once they're pressured. And if you're fishing over them when they've hardly seen anything, you just have a huge advantage.
Yeah, you're right. Chris, what about you? What do you like to tie with? Like, what are your favorite kind of flies to tie up, and what materials do you find to be the most effective?
I kind of got on the train of tube flies at the same time, maybe a little bit later then Jakob, I remember tying this winter and we were on FaceTime or whatever and just tying tube flies using soft hairs and things like that. And so I've kind of been into that too, fishing tubes heavily. Another thing is what I've been doing. I fish a lot of weighted flies, whether that be nymphs, woolly buggers, or large articulated streamers. So I think imparting weight to your fly, I think is probably my most important thing, other than fishing for salmon, of course, but for brook trout especially, and not even brook trout, pike, rainbows, browns, especially when in streamers. Well, nymphs, of course, I like to get them down deep with tungsten beads. So I think that's really important if you're going to be a serious nymph fisherman. I don't tie nymphs on brass beads. If I'm going to fish a nymph, it's either going to be on tungsten, and you can adjust the sink rate by size, or I'm going to fish like an emerger or like an unweighted nymph as an emerger. But I think the biggest part when it comes to trout fishing, other than trolling, of course, like poly leader or sink tip versus a weighted fly. If you have a weighted fly like this, woolly bugger, the cone head on it, that fly is gonna, when you strip it, because the weight's at the front, it's gonna kind of swim like this, kind of like a leech, right? And same as in your bigger streamers, like this one tied by Maryland Prince has dumbbell eyes on the front of it, and that's gonna get that same action. But if you have, if you're fishing a sink tip and an unweighted fly, that fly, you're not gonna have that kicking motion. You're not going to have that pulsing motion or the drop. And I think that's a really big key, especially in big streamers too. That dying bait fish, activity that they do, and like failing as he's swimming and things like that. And it's just a fishy, motion. So like casting upstream with the streamer for trout and stripping down and just giving it really good hard strips. As it's coming down, it's sinking already, coming downstream. Not many bait fish swim downstream unless they're injured. And that, that kick side to side, or that, that with the articulated, or that drop or rise and drop and fighting itself motion, I think that is key, whether that be fishing like a woolly bugger, a weighted muddler, these bigger articulated streamers or anything like that. I think that's a big aspect to catching a lot of big fish, especially, like I said, on streamers. And versus the sink tip, you're just going to get a straight pull. It's going to sink down, and you're going to pull it and pull it and pull it and pull it, and you still kind of get a bit of a motion, but it's completely altogether different than a weighted fly. And with a sink tip, you're not going to have as much control and feel in that fly. Like when you're stripping a weighted fly, you can feel the fly, and when something changes, when more weight comes on there, there's a lot of stretch, a lot of, you're not in, unless you have really good sinking tip fly line, you're not going to be in touch with that, with your fly. So I think weight is my probably favorite material when it comes to fly tying. Now, of course, I like my Arctic Fox on salmon flies and even on trophy flies too. Woolly bugger tail, Arctic Fox, non-traditional, but definitely effective. More bulky in the water, same amount of movement. Depends on what you're imitating.
Cool. All right. So the secret's out. Arctic Fox tails and materials sales are going to go up in every fly shop around the province now.
It's the best.
All right. There's a question here that from Nate. First, he starts off by saying, if we're lucky, maybe we can keep the current warming trend. Maybe, he says, just maybe Arctic char will start to make their way to southern waters. He fished them when he was in the Arctic. And he asks, has Chris fished them in Labrador?
My service was terrible. I did not hear anything you just said. I'm sorry. I heard something about Arctic char.
Yeah, you were asked if you ever fished them in Labrador.
Oh, have I ever fished them in Labrador? Yes. Arctic char river. Primarily, they're a really weird fish. They're similar to salmon. Like, they don't feed well. and they don't feed in fresh water. So a lot of it's like attractor, or we're using like small nymphs or even like shad darts in red. Bloodworms patterns like a brassy, a red brassy, or like a a vinyl rib bloodworm pattern on a sinking line, or even on an indicator. They're really probably one of the hardest fish I've ever fished for, because it's so random. And it's what you compare to, it would be the same as fishing for shad. It really is. You cast out, let's say, short strips, quick strips, and then just that same shad take, and you get a charge, and like you can catch the same size, doing the same thing. You catch a char this long, or you can catch one this long.
Try a few things to get Tim back in here. There we go.
It's probably like fishing. It's like lock style fishing in a way. In that short strips and things like that. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Not a lot of clients want to do it because they're there for the salmon. They're great tasting fish, and yeah, I mean, it's not something we primarily target, but we do occasionally. We don't usually. They're not usually found in the main salmon pools they have.
All right, yeah, he it's in bad service, but from what I got from that, they don't fish them much. He said but they are great tasting fish. But I guess if people are up there, they're probably going to be spending money on those world-class salmon, right? So
I certainly
definitely
would be.
one of my bucket list fish. I'd love to go get one. When they get all colored up like that, the bright orange,
Yeah.
they're pretty cool. You've never run into any of those in your competition days, have you? Arctic char?
No, I've never fished char. I'd like to. I'm sure it'd be fun, but
So I know your salmon.
Destinations.
Yeah. Oh man, I got to get to Iceland. We got our buddy Tim there who's fished up there, and it's on my bucket list for sure.
Yeah.
I do. Other than salmon, what's your bucket list fish? Like, what's maybe a few fish that you're like, I got to catch one?
I don't know, man. 40-pound salmon in Russia. That's I'm telling you.
Russia. Like, I see. You see all the you see some of the pictures of salmon they get over there, man. Russia, and is it Finland or somewhere, or I guess all that area kind of.
Well,
but is Russia's like the gold standard, is it?
For numbers, in terms of big salmon, probably your best shot at a record-sized salmon would be probably the Rescue Cascapedia or some of the rivers in Norway, which are consistently producing like 25 kilogram fish every year, which are 50 plus pounds coming out of these pools in Norway every year. So
that's insane.
It's a $25,000 trip to fish there, but
yeah,
probably be worth it in the long run.
Well, they know there's people out there that would pay it for a 50-pound salmon, right? So, God, the money
is every year. Oh
yeah. Yeah. Any other species aside from salmon that you're like?
I would like to fish bonefish and tarpon, in the flats. That'd be fun. I'd like to do that.
Yeah, that's that. If I had my choice, if someone said you can go and fish something. That it would probably be that bonefish. I mean, I heard bonefish are pound for pound some of the best fighters, and the idea, the idea of catching one of those huge tarpon like that would be pretty crazy too.
That would be awesome. Oh
yeah. So I think hopefully Chris comes back in here, but we're gonna wrap up one last topic. I was gonna ask both of you guys. Hopefully Chris can come back in. Just kind of your thoughts on Nova Scotia fishing in general. Do you think there needs to be changes? Do you think we're doing a good job? What's your overall kind of impression of Nova Scotia? And I want to ask you and Chris, because I know you've both fished different places. So, what are your kind of thoughts on fishing in general in Nova Scotia?
Well, I think the waters that need to be almost patrolled are way under patrolled or not. There's places within the Antigonish area, this whole side of Nova Scotia that are basically holding hundreds of huge brown trout, and those spots are being abused year after year by people who are fishing as about as illegal as you can possibly fish. I think stuff like that needs to change. They need to be a lot stricter, and they need to start not giving warnings, handing out fines to kind of prove a point to people that we're not effing around anymore. Like it's pretty ridiculous what goes on every single year, and nothing seems to be really done about it other than what some of the main guys are doing. They're trying to make it fly only, but it wouldn't. Those regulations only matter for the people who are genuinely following the regulations. And I mean, I think another big factor to the Nova Scotia fishing as a whole is probably social media. I think a lot of people need to like sort of smarten up in a way about what they're posting, what they're even passing on, what they're talking about. I think that's had where I live, it's had a horrible effect on the fishing.
Okay.
Yeah.
You just think so? Basically, just a lot of these spots that weren't seeing much pressure are getting a lot of pressure now.
Well, a lot of pressure from people who you don't want there to begin with. So, like, I know last year I was fishing, and just as I was going into a spot, there was a guy leaving with 2 illegally caught browns that were probably in the 8-pound range. That I guarantee you were ripped in the back with a treble hook, because that brown I caught with you guys that day had a treble hook in his side. Like, you can only do so much. I mean, you gotta hand out. You gotta, like, DFO needs to be finding people. Like, they need to be all over these guys, but you can only do so much, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you're right. Better patrolling, and even if you do change the regulations, you're still going to get. It doesn't matter fishing, hunting. You're still going to get people that are going to go out and do things the dirty way anyway. But I think that the only way to really stop that is, like you said, to kind of have better patrols. And I know it might come down to a money thing and expense. But if we're serious about promoting, the province is trying to promote sport fishing now. They're going to put an effort into doing that. If you're going to do that, then I think those kind of things have to change first, because it's going to be hard to pull people in from other provinces, in my opinion.
Like, just as a quick side note here,
regulations. So yeah,
like, in terms of, like, this is kind of just a funny story, but my friend Topher Brown, he fishes salmon all over the world. He's fished literally everywhere in Russia, because at one point, like 10, 20 years ago, the stocks in those rivers that are getting runs of 80,000 plus big lake salmon were actually declining, like, faster than any salmon river in the world, because of people targeting them with huge nets in the, I don't know, estuaries or the mouths of the rivers. So those are actually military patrolled rivers now, and there's no threat of getting a fine. There's only a threat of getting shot. So actually, he was there, and he was stopped by 2 guys, and they asked for, like, his papers and stuff. And they basically said that every few years they'll catch people trying to poach salmon, and they do give them a warning. And in the Russian accents, no lie, this made hard to bleed. They literally say, next time we shoot you in the head. That's how serious they take it there, like their conservation and wanting to keep the stocks like that for pretty much forever.
Yeah, well, they know the huge economic value to those rivers too. So they're gonna, they're gonna do. And I mean, we're talking different countries and different mentality and different culture too. So yeah, they're gonna. I don't know if that would really fly here in Canada. That kind of patrol.
It wouldn't. But just so much. It's like they're way more strict, and like here, like there's a lot of places here you could go and you could be fishing illegally probably all season. No one's gonna know other than yourself. So
exactly.
You can only do so much, though. I mean.
So Chris came back, and basically the only thing you missed, I was basically saying I was going to cover one more topic. I was going to ask each of you, because I know that you've both had the opportunity to fish in different places. So I just kind of wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on fishing in Nova Scotia in general? Like compared to other places, or just like your thoughts on Nova Scotia. Is it good? Are we doing a good job? Do you think there's things that could change, or how can we improve it? Kind of just like your overall thoughts on Nova Scotia fishing.
This ties into kind of the last conversation you were talking about, and I'll bring it back around to what you just asked, but it's interesting, like Nova Scotia. Okay, you look at it, the fishing's like considering, what we're dealing with. We have an amazing resource here, very diverse resource, dealing with multiple species, invasives, and native species, whether that be browns, rainbows, and chain pickerel and smallmouth bass, or native brook trout, Atlantic salmon, and other various striped bass, native species. So it's hard because it really comes down to like what you were talking about before. It's like, okay, number one's the mindset. Nova Scotia, from what I've talked to from people who've fished here, have been established here for a while, and have been established across Canada. A lot of it's to do with mindset, and it's unfortunate. Like, it's that uppity, fly fishing group versus the big guys, and it was always like that. And even within the fly fishing crew, and even within like the big guys or whatever, you have different mindsets. But like, what happens in Nova Scotia when it comes to its tradition, it's people think they deserve all these things, and it's their right and all this stuff. And yeah, to an extent that's true, whether that be fly fishermen or spin fishermen. But what happens in Nova Scotia wouldn't fly anywhere else, really. Like, if you look at Alberta, you have barbless, 100% barbless. There's so many catch and release waters that's enforced, and like Jakob said, it comes down to money, and like, not necessarily for enforcement. I mean, that's a huge thing. I wish we had more enforcement, whether that's federal, provincial, but also money to manage species, and whether, like I said, whether that's federal, provincial. But inland fisheries has been doing some amazing work controlling invasive species, and I won't get into that too much, but they've been doing some amazing work fighting illegal introductions, and they deserve a lot of respect for that. They're doing a lot of work considering, Nova Scotia is not a large industrious province, with low population. And, it's hard to manage species when it comes down to that. They're doing a good job regardless. You look at like closures and bag limit changes and slot size implementations on rivers like the South River and Antigonish West River, the same areas in our region. I think, and then you look at the river restoration, they're partnering up with multiple organizations to get this stuff done. So I think that Nova Scotia overall, I mean, they're doing a great job on our natural resources when it comes to fish. Of course, there's room for improvement and everything. I'm not gonna pretend like it's perfect, because it isn't. I mean, we all want certain things. But they're between a rock and a hard place with a couple species, especially like the native species, because it's not just it's some of it's out of their control, some of it's climate, some of it's politics. So there's that part of it. But at the same time, like, they're right now, they're starting to work on looking at lake trout in Nova Scotia, and looking at they were doing work on Acadian whitefish, and they're doing work with the DFO on Atlantic salmon, and and then they're fighting off invasive species introductions. I think, all in all, I mean, we have to be pretty impressed with what's happening when it comes to like inland fisheries management in Nova Scotia. I mean, considering they're doing a pretty good job, but there's a lot of unfortunate things that happen, especially, and it really comes down to politics, and it's unfortunate for not just for anglers, but for the species themselves and the intrinsic, value of species, and especially native species in Nova Scotia. It's kind of, I think that's where it really comes down to, native species is, not necessarily a major priority for all anglers, and it's, I don't know if it's a social media generation, or it's just like me and Jakob, hardcore salmon and trout guys, and in the younger generation, that's we're becoming the minority, and it's very uncomfortable to know, what's trudging forward, and how what we believe in and how what we love might not necessarily be, held on to.
Yeah, and I mean, I think with that being said, I do see more people kind of getting into fly fishing and salmon that are, a younger generation, which is great. But on the same side of things, I also see a lot of people getting into fishing other species and multi-species. I mean, I fish multi-species. I just like fishing in general. I don't care what it is. I want to catch. Like some days I just feel the challenge of going out and trying to get, this species or that species. And like most of the fish I eat now are invasive species, or like, white perch, who's not invasive, but like, a healthier population than trout and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I do see like a bigger trend of people fishing bass and chain pickerel, and I think it's just people who are getting into fishing. And I mean, we all know how difficult tracking down some decent trout can be. Or you can go to like any lake, almost an HRM around Halifax here, and get into the decent sized fish from shore and get yourself a feed. So I think that is playing into kind of like a lot of anglers focusing on smallmouth bass and stuff. And then you kind of get like the influence from other provinces. They're big into smallmouth bass and stuff and tournaments and all that. And, you see, all these cool baits and, things you can use for bass. And I think that it's drawing people away from kind of that traditional trout and salmon,
Yeah, it's kind of that thing, I went through a stage when I was at that, and it's kind of like I've so far gone from that kind of realm of fishing. But at one time I was fishing, white perch the same way you would fish smallmouth bass in lakes around home. And then that was a short stint, and then kind of get away from it. But I think if the opportunity arises to like introduce someone into fly fishing for cold water species, I think people should take it, because it's, it's heritage really here, and something that people have to hold on to, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the history of it. Like, Nova Scotia was known for, our salmon, really, and the history behind like the Margaree and the history behind the St. Mary's. Like, I'm not really familiar with the St. Mary's. I know a little bit about the Margaree, but it's kind of like, going back to your roots, I guess, if you're from Nova Scotia. Going back to your roots, like where it kind of all began. And I mean, invasives are invasives. We're not going to get into that topic. We know the damage they do. Like, teach their own. If that's kind of the fishing you want to do, like, go for it. That's your right as an angler. But I think everyone should at least give it a try somehow. I mean, I know it's hard to just pick up a fly rod and go to the Margaree and catch fish. I've been fishing it for years and I still can't hook one. So, but hire a good guide or something. Like, try it. I put a couple guys a fly rod in their hands this year for striped bass. Never threw a fly line before, and every one of them that hooked a fish was like, "Wow! Like, I got to get a fly rod. It's way different. It's a different feel. It's a different technique. It's like it's not even really close. It's two different realms almost. So." But I mean, yeah, I think Nova Scotia's doing a pretty good job overall. The one thing I would like to see, and you kind of mentioned it in Alberta, is like some catch and release rivers. Why don't we have, just designate one? If you're not going to designate like one of the salmon rivers, let's say, if you're not going to designate one of the salmon rivers or big sea trout rivers as catch and release, then maybe choose another river and start stocking it with species and make that one catch and release. There's only one catch and release river here, and it's because of PCB contamination, but like, all kinds of fish in it. You know what I mean? I that's something I would like to see. I don't know if I'm like, shooting for the stars here, or my hopes are high, but if we're going to, like I said, if we're going to promote sport fishing in Nova Scotia to the rest of the world, we got to give them something spectacular to come here to. You know, I mean, yeah, Margarita's a beautiful river. But I think we got to give them more options if we're really going to be serious about bringing people to the province and making bringing in revenue from it. I think that's something you got to offer people. You know, that's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a very
Yeah.
good point. So something I didn't touch on. I think that we have rivers that would be perfectly suited for that. You know, whether they're stocked heavily or, I think salmon rivers is a great, first start for, catching these brook trout fisheries or whatever species are in there, rainbows or browns. Because that, obviously catch release, you can limit, single barbless hook, no live bait, and, then you have catch release. That's that next step past, your slot size, past your bag production.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see that in the coming years. At least I hope we do. But then it really comes just down to the mindset of the angler in Nova Scotia. And, it's a pretty blue collar fishery for the most part. And I mean, no harm by that, but it really is. If you look at, the population in Nova Scotia, it's pretty blue collar. And then, Alberta is too, but then you have these, larger populations, which also bring larger individuals within these specific groups, like say fly fishing, and they have more sway and things like that. So maybe with the uprising of fly fishing with the social media generation, maybe we'll see that happen in Nova Scotia. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it pushed for that. And I think, like I said, I think the salmon rivers are great candidates for that.
Yeah, I agree. And I would have said that, but I think that's a long time. That'll take some work before we saw anything like that, I think. But
I said, like, it's the mindset of the angler too, like the average angler in Nova Scotia. It's hard to change that, and it may never change. It's hard to say, but
yeah.
What
And
are you gonna offer in return? Like,
exactly.
It's a scale. It's like the old fashioned weight scales. Like, it has to balance out, and I respect that.
Yeah. Well, you got to respect it. You buy your license, you got to respect that people can keep within their limits and they can fish to the regulations. You got to respect that regardless of how you feel. Yeah, it's like I say to people all the time. Like, I don't like to see bigger trout taken out of system, but if it's within the regulation, you paid money for the license. So you got to have kind of that respect as well.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's in it for the same reason, just to enjoy fishing. So if they're doing it within the law and within the regulations, respect. You gotta give respect.
I'll make one quick comment on that, and I don't want to step on any toes, not within this chat, but I don't know who's listening. But in Newfoundland, you have catch and release across, the maritime region, but then in Newfoundland you're still allowed to tag fish. And Quebec the same way. Quebec's a different bird altogether, but Newfoundland, is primarily grouse run. And like that's a whole nother topic, but it's also it's a sign of the times, what's happening, who's doing catch and release across the world, and yes, it's within their legal limits to retain a grouse, or depends on river scheduling in Newfoundland, how many grouse you can keep, but at the same time, just because it's within their legal limits doesn't make it right. And I think we see that in Nova Scotia too in some places, and that's why we're pushing for these, catch and release or reduced bag limit or slot size. But I respect. I've killed more trout this year for food than I have in probably 6 or 7 years, and I'm not going out slaughtering. I'm making sure that when I do keep a fish, I'm putting it on the table at night rather than letting it sit in my freezer for months and months, which is a stereotype, but it's true. It happens quite a bit, which is unfortunate, but it's their right. Now, if they're going to go keep 5 more fish, they'll be over their bag limit, can't be enforced. That's a whole other can of worms you can talk about. But I think just because it's the regulation now, I guess my point is, just because it's regulation doesn't make it right, and I don't necessarily think that it should be respected, because if it should be changed, do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not
Yeah.
trying to fuck you at all, but I mean, if we all agree that things should be changed, then let's change them and do it right, and change the things that need to be changed.
Yep. No, I get your point. And hopefully someday they do, because I feel the same. I think bag limits should be down, but for now, if you're not breaking the law, well, you have the right to do it. All right, so I'm gonna end the show with one question, and I know you're both fly fishermen, so it might be a tough question. Maybe it won't be. I'll go with you, Jacob, and I'm gonna ask Chris the same question. If you're only allowed to have one fly in your fly box, if the fish gods came down and be like, no, you get one fly in that box, and that's it, what's it gonna be?
Without a doubt, it would be an undertaker tied on a size 6 double. Because I would, 100%. I'd fish salmon for the rest of my life. I'd stop trout fishing right now, but if I could only do that, for sure.
Google searches of undertakers. Yeah, that Google search just went up by the hundreds.
I'll show you here.
Perfect.
So
the secret's out, everybody.
The rescue last year.
Awesome.
Someone, I don't know who tied this, but I got a 25 plus pound fish on the rescue last year on that exact fly, tied by the Sinclair.
I was thankful to be a part of that experience.
Wicked, yeah.
It was just a fun.
I wonder how many screenshots of that fly just occurred there. Right.
I screenshotted it.
All right, Chris, same question to you, buddy. One fly in the box. You can only have one. What's it going to be?
Geez, that's a really, really, really tough one.
I know, that's why I asked.
Pat the Corva.
For salmon and trout, man, butterfly, 100%.
Butterfly, nice, yeah.
100%.
That's
100%. White wing butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
Check out my tutorial on YouTube. Little bit of hint there, but yeah, butterfly. Definitely, I caught my biggest brook trout in Nova Scotia on a butterfly, and there's a lot of people that catch a lot of big salmon on a butterfly in Nova Scotia, fall and summer. So I think that one takes the cake for me, man. I really do.
Right on. So there's going to be a lot more. You're going to see a lot more white wing butterflies and double undertakers this year on the river, and you have Christopher Sinclair and Jacob to thank for that. Maybe a lot more.
I'm so sorry to everyone who fishes a butterfly. I apologize in advance.
Yeah. I've said it before when I asked this question to previous guests, but mine is I'd have to go with the muddler just because it's the most well-rounded. I think it'll catch everything. No, Jacob's not impressed with my answer. Sorry. But remember, I'm a multi-species angler. A what?
Which fly, the muddler or the bugger?
Muddler, I think. Oh, bugger now. Now you got me thinking. Oh.
I was going to say bugger because I really do think that it's the best multi-species fly, but it's not my favorite. I have to go with butterfly. The bugger would be like number 2, like number 1.5, I think, actually.
But like unweighted woolly bugger though, because see, I know I've hooked salmon on a muddler. I've never tried a bugger, but like
beadhead or conehead, preferably tungsten.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna still stick with muddler. Just because No, just a regular muddler. Like I said, I'm a multi-species guy, and I think a muddler would catch. I mean, hey, woolly bugger would too, but can't weight it for salmon fishing. So
yeah,
that would knock off the salmon fishing.
I think that's a good call, dude. A pretty good number one.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, fellas. Well, thanks for joining me tonight. Chris, big thank you to you. You're on the road there, and you were in and out of signal, and back and forth, but appreciate it. Didn't mean to cut into your fishing time and your I don't know what I would call it. Your alone time. I guess you're there by yourself. I don't know. Recreational time. Casting practice. Yeah. All right, buddy. Well, good luck. Yeah. Good luck, buddy, down there in Cape Breton. I hope you hook up with a few fish, man. I'll be talking to you soon. Jacob, thanks, man. You guys are a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure that everyone learned a lot about, fishing in general and trout and flies. And now we know that people are going to be buying tube flies and filling their box with all kinds of flies, the double green butt there. And anyway, thanks for being on, guys.
Yeah.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Tune in next week, same time. Tight lines.